The mansion stood tall at the edge of the city. Its glass walls reflected the morning sun, and the garden was so large it looked like a park of its own. Inside this mansion lived a man named Mr. Adrian. He was a billionaire who owned many companies. People often spoke about his success, but they also whispered that he trusted no one easily. Mr. Adrian had everything a person could dream of. Expensive cars rested in the garage, priceless paintings decorated the walls, and rare antiques filled the rooms. Yet, despite all his wealth, he lived alone. His only company was the small group of workers who kept the mansion running. Among them was a maid named Maria. She was a quiet woman who came to work early every day. She wore simple clothes, never complained, and always did her duties with care. Unlike the other workers, she never tried to speak much with Mr. Adrian. She stayed in the background, cleaning rooms, polishing furniture, and making sure everything was in order. One evening, as Mr. Adrian sat in his office, he thought about trust. He remembered stories of rich men who lost everything because someone close betrayed them. He wondered if the same could happen to him. His eyes moved toward the large safe built into the wall behind his desk. Inside the safe lay not only money but also documents that could control his entire empire. That night, a thought entered his mind. He wanted to test his workers, especially Maria. She had been with him for 2 years and had never caused any trouble, but Adrian believed that true loyalty was only proven when temptation was placed in front of a person. The next morning, Adrian called the head butler and told him to give Maria extra cleaning work inside the study room. The study was a place she rarely entered, for Adrian usually kept it locked. After giving the order, Adrian himself went into the study and carefully opened the safe. He left the heavy steel door wide open. Inside, stacks of cash and shining jewelry were visible, as if waiting for someone to take them. He stepped back, adjusting his suit, and whispered to himself, "Now we will see the truth." Then he left the room, pretending he had forgotten to lock the safe. Maria arrived later with her cleaning tools. She walked into the study, surprised that the door was open. Usually, this was the most private place in the house. She glanced around, dust already gathering on the desk and shelves. She put down her tools and began to work quietly, wiping the surfaces and arranging the books. After a few minutes, her eyes fell on the wide-open safe. For a moment, her hands froze. She stared at the piles of money, the glitter of gold, and the shining stones. Her heart beat faster. Never in her life had she seen such treasures up close. Maria stepped closer. Her reflection showed faintly on the polished steel of the safe door. She could smell the faint scent of leather from the money bundles. She reached out slowly, not to touch the money, but to brush the dust near the edges of the safe. She whispered to herself, "Why would someone leave this open?" Her eyes shifted toward the door. No one was around. The entire mansion was silent, as if holding its breath. Meanwhile, in another corner of the mansion, Adrian watched through a hidden camera. His eyes were sharp, and his hands rested on the desk as he observed Maria's every move. He wanted to see if greed would take over her. Maria stood still for a long moment. Then she stepped back, took a deep breath, and returned to her cleaning. She picked up her cloth and began polishing the desk once more. Not once did she reach inside the safe. But Adrian was not satisfied yet. He leaned closer to the screen, thinking, is she clever enough to pretend, or is she truly honest? When Maria finished cleaning the desk, she took out a piece of paper from her pocket. It was a small list where she usually wrote notes about things to fix or clean. She wrote on the paper, "Safe was left open," folded it neatly, and placed it on top of the desk where Adrian would see it. Then, without another glance at the safe, she packed her tools and left the study. Adrian leaned back in his chair, surprised. He had expected hesitation, maybe even temptation, but he had not expected this simple honesty. For the first time in a long while, he felt something stir inside him. A thought he rarely allowed himself crossed his mind: maybe not everyone had a price. But Adrian was not a man who trusted quickly. He told himself, this is only the beginning. I need to know more. And so, his test was far from over. The next morning, Adrian entered his study. The safe door was still wide open, just as he had left it. But on his desk, he noticed a small folded paper. He opened it slowly. In neat handwriting it read, "Safe was left open." Adrian held the note in his hand for a long moment. His lips curved into a half smile, though his eyes remained thoughtful. Maria had not touched anything. She had even warned him in the most honest way. But one simple act was not enough to earn his trust. He wanted to be certain. Later that day, Adrian called the head butler. "Send Maria to me," he said. Maria entered the study with her hands folded in front of her. She kept her eyes lowered, as she always did. "You asked for me, sir," she said quietly. Adrian studied her face. He wanted to see if she looked nervous, but she appeared calm. He asked, "Did you notice something unusual yesterday?" Maria nodded. "Yes, sir. The safe was left open. I thought you might not know, so I wrote it down for you." Her voice was steady, without fear. Adrian leaned back in his chair. "You did not touch it?" he asked. Maria's eyes widened slightly. "No, sir. Why would I? It does not belong to me." Her words were simple, yet they struck Adrian in a way he did not expect. For a man who had met countless people chasing his money, her answer sounded different. Still, his heart remained guarded. He dismissed her with a wave of his hand. As Maria left the room, Adrian thought carefully. One test is not enough. If she is truly honest, I must see it again under harder temptation. That evening, Adrian went to his private vault room. There he kept not only money but also documents, shares, and even rare jewels that collectors across the world desired. He chose a small golden necklace, shining brightly under the lights. It was valuable, but small enough to carry without being noticed. He placed it inside a jewelry box and set it on a table in the guest lounge, as if someone had forgotten it. The next morning, he called Maria and said, "Today, clean the guest lounge carefully. A visitor may come later." Maria nodded and went to work. She entered the lounge, carrying her cleaning tools. The first thing her eyes noticed was the box lying on the table. It was small, decorated with golden patterns. She hesitated for a second, then picked it up to dust beneath it. As she held the box, she felt its weight and wondered what was inside. Her fingers moved to the clasp, but she stopped herself. She whispered, "It is not mine to open." Carefully, she placed the box back exactly where it had been. She then continued her work, dusting the shelves and polishing the wooden chairs. Meanwhile, Adrian once again watched through a hidden camera. His eyes narrowed when she held the box. For a brief moment, he thought she would open it. But when she stopped, he leaned closer to the screen. Maria worked for an hour in the lounge. Before leaving, she returned to the box and shifted it slightly so that it looked neat. Then she left the room without ever peeking inside. Adrian walked into the lounge shortly after. He picked up the box, opened it, and saw the golden necklace lying untouched. He looked around the room, noticing how Maria had even straightened the cushions on the chairs. The man felt puzzled. Why did she not even open it, he thought. Most people would not resist their curiosity. For the rest of the day, he found himself thinking about her. He remembered her simple clothes, her quiet nature, and her steady way of working. She seemed to live in a world far away from his wealth. Perhaps that was why she was not tempted. But Adrian was not ready to stop. He decided he would test her once more, but this time in a different way. Instead of leaving valuables lying around, he would test her kindness. He wanted to see if her heart was as honest as her hands. That night, he spoke to the head butler and gave him quiet instructions. Tomorrow, I will drop a sealed envelope in the garden path. It will look important. Tell Maria to clean the garden, and watch what she does when she finds it. The next day, Maria carried her tools into the garden. The morning sun made the flowers glow, and the air was filled with the sound of birds. As she swept the path, her eyes caught sight of a white envelope lying on the stones. She bent down and picked it up. It was thick and sealed tightly. On the front, the name Adrian was written in bold letters. Maria looked around. The garden was empty. She held the envelope for a moment, then walked straight back into the mansion. She asked the butler, "Sir, I found this on the path. I think it belongs to Mr. Adrian. Could you please give it to him?" The butler nodded and took the envelope, hiding his surprise. He later carried the news to Adrian. When Adrian opened the envelope, he saw it was just filled with blank papers, as he had planned. But the real message lay in Maria's actions. She had not opened it, not even out of curiosity. She had brought it back without delay. Adrian sat in silence for a long time. His plan to test her was working, but instead of finding weakness, he was discovering strength. Maria had passed every challenge. Yet a thought troubled him. If she is so honest, then why is she here? What is her story? For the first time in years, Adrian felt curious about someone not because of business, but because of their character. He decided that soon, he would learn who Maria truly was. Adrian sat in his office with the folded envelope still on the desk. His plan had been simple, but the result had left him with questions. Maria had proven honesty not once but twice. She had resisted money, resisted gold, and even resisted curiosity. Most people failed at least one of these. But she had passed all without effort. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. For years he had lived surrounded by wealth but not by trust. Every person who came close to him had wanted something. Yet Maria had been close to all his treasures and had touched none. That night, Adrian called the head butler. "Tell me," he asked, "what do you know about Maria?" The butler thought for a moment. "She came here 2 years ago, sir. She applied for the position quietly. She never asked for extra pay or special treatment. She does her work, then leaves. She does not mix much with the other staff. They say she lives in a small house near the old market." Adrian nodded slowly. He wanted to know more. The next morning, after Maria arrived for her duties, Adrian quietly asked his driver to follow her when she left in the evening. He wanted to see where she lived and what kind of life she led. The driver returned later that night with his report. "Sir, she walked from the mansion to the old market area. She entered a small, worn-down house at the end of a narrow lane. The place is quiet. I saw her light a small lamp inside. She seems to live alone." Adrian was silent after hearing this. The image of Maria in a simple home, lighting a lamp instead of switching on bright lights, stayed in his mind. He wondered why someone who lived in such hardship never even looked at the treasures that were placed before her. The following day, Adrian decided to see for himself. He ordered his car but told the driver to stop a short distance away from Maria's lane. He walked the rest of the path quietly, wearing a plain coat so no one would recognize him. The houses in the lane were old and small. Paint peeled from the walls, and the roofs looked weak. He finally stopped at a door where a small lantern hung outside. It was Maria's house. Through the thin curtains, he could see her inside. She was sitting at a table, sewing clothes. On the table beside her sat a small plate of bread and soup. Adrian's eyes softened. He had never imagined that his maid, who worked in a mansion full of gold, returned home to such simplicity. He stayed hidden and watched for a while. Then, suddenly, he noticed a sound from inside. A cough. It was weak but clear. Adrian's eyes moved again, and to his surprise, he saw a little boy come out from the inner room. The child looked about 7 years old, thin and pale. Maria quickly rose, went to him, and placed her hand on his forehead. She gave him the bread and soup before eating anything herself. Adrian stepped back in shock. He had never heard that Maria had a child. She had always appeared alone. Now the truth was before his eyes. The boy sat down quietly, and Maria returned to her sewing. Her hands moved quickly, stitching torn clothes. She looked tired but never complained. Adrian could see that everything she earned went to care for the child. That night, as Adrian returned to his mansion, his mind was restless. For the first time in many years, he felt respect for someone outside his business circle. Maria was not just honest. She was strong, carrying a burden no one knew about. The next morning, Adrian called for Maria. She entered his office as usual, bowing her head slightly. "Yes, sir," she asked. Adrian studied her for a moment. He thought of asking her directly about the boy, but he held back. Instead, he said, "You have worked here for 2 years. Why do you stay in this job when you could look for something easier?" Maria looked at him with calm eyes. "Because this job feeds me and someone I care about," she said simply. Adrian leaned forward. "Someone you care about?" Maria nodded. "Yes, sir. My younger brother. He is not strong, so I look after him. He is all I have left." Her voice was steady, but there was a hint of sadness in her eyes. She did not say more. She bowed again and left to continue her duties. Adrian sat in silence long after she was gone. He realized the boy he had seen was her brother, not her son. She had been carrying this responsibility alone, never speaking of it, never asking for help. He felt something stir inside him again, something he had buried for years: admiration. Maria was poor, yet she was rich in character. She was honest, hard-working, and caring in ways that money could not buy. That evening, as Adrian stood by the tall windows of his mansion, he whispered to himself, "She passed all my tests, but she was never playing a game. She was simply living with truth." Still, questions remained. Why had life left her with only a weak brother to care for? What had happened to her family? Adrian felt he had only seen the first page of her story. And he knew he wanted to learn the rest. The next few days were different for Adrian. He still attended meetings, signed deals, and made decisions worth millions, but his thoughts often drifted back to Maria. Her honesty had impressed him, but it was her quiet strength that stayed in his mind. He could not forget the image of her sewing clothes late at night, giving food to her weak brother before eating anything herself. For a man who lived in luxury, it was a strange feeling to think so much about someone who lived in such simplicity. Yet Adrian wanted to know more. He wanted to understand her story, not because of curiosity alone but because he felt something valuable hid behind her silence. One afternoon, when Maria finished her work, Adrian called her into the study. She entered with her usual calm, standing with her hands folded. "Maria," he began, "I have a question. You said your younger brother is not strong. Why is that so?" For the first time, Maria's eyes lowered with hesitation. She was quiet for a moment before answering softly, "He has been sick since he was very young. Our parents passed away years ago, and I became the one to care for him. I work to provide food, medicine, and whatever else he needs." Adrian nodded slowly. Her voice held no complaint, only plain truth. "And how do you manage all of this alone?" he asked. Maria gave a faint smile. "By working hard and trusting that honesty will guide me. I do not need much for myself. As long as my brother has what he needs, I am at peace." Adrian felt her words touch something deep inside him. In his world, people measured life in numbers, profits, and possessions. But here stood a woman who measured life by responsibility and love. After she left, Adrian called his assistant. "Find out about Maria's past," he ordered quietly. "I want to know everything that happened to her family." The assistant worked quickly and returned 2 days later with a file. Adrian opened it and read carefully. Maria had once lived in a small but happy household. Her father had been a schoolteacher, and her mother worked in a small shop. But tragedy struck when an illness spread through their town. Both parents had fallen sick, and within months, they were gone. Maria, only 17 at the time, was left with her younger brother Daniel, who had already been weak since birth. With no relatives willing to help, Maria took the role of guardian. She worked in small jobs, cleaning houses, sewing clothes, anything that would bring food to the table. Life had been harsh, but she had never given up. At last, she found steady work at Adrian's mansion 2 years ago. Adrian closed the file slowly. He leaned back in his chair, thinking deeply. Maria's story explained everything: her silence, her strength, and her honesty. She was not interested in wealth because she had already learned that money could not replace family. She valued only what mattered, her brother's well-being. The next morning, when Maria came to dust the study, Adrian spoke gently. "Maria, I know you have carried a heavy burden. I respect what you have done for your brother." Maria looked at him with surprise. Her lips parted as if to ask how he knew, but she stopped herself. She bowed her head slightly. "Thank you, sir." There was a pause. Then Adrian asked, "What does your brother dream of becoming?" Maria's eyes softened. "He loves books. Even when he is sick, he reads. He says he wants to be a teacher, like our father. But I do not know if his health will allow it." Her voice trembled slightly at the last words, though she tried to hide it. Adrian noticed, but he did not press further. Later that day, Adrian found himself standing by the tall window, looking out at the garden. The thought of Maria's brother, a young boy with dreams but no strength, stirred something in him. For years, he had built empires, but he had never stopped to think of small lives that fought silent battles. That evening, Adrian made a decision. He called his private doctor, one of the best in the country, and said, "Prepare to visit someone tomorrow. I want a full checkup and treatment plan." The following afternoon, Adrian sent his car to Maria's house. At first, she was startled by the arrival of the shining black car outside her small home. When Adrian himself stepped out, she almost dropped the water jug she was holding. "Sir," she said quickly, "why are you here?" Adrian's voice was calm. "I came to meet your brother." Maria hesitated, looking nervous, but she finally stepped aside and let him in. Inside the small house, Adrian saw Daniel sitting at the table with a book in his hands. The boy's face lit with curiosity at the sight of a stranger, though he looked weak. Adrian smiled gently. "You must be Daniel." The boy nodded. "Yes, sir." Adrian turned to Maria. "I brought a doctor with me. He will examine your brother." Maria's eyes widened in shock. "Sir, that is too much. You do not need to." Adrian raised a hand. "It is not charity. It is respect. You have shown me honesty that money cannot buy. Let me do this for you." Maria's lips trembled, and for the first time since she had joined the mansion, her eyes filled with tears. She quickly looked away, wiping them with her sleeve, and whispered, "Thank you, sir." As the doctor entered and began examining Daniel, Adrian stood silently, watching Maria. He realized that this woman had passed all his tests not because she wanted to prove anything but because her heart was pure. And now, without expecting it, she had tested him as well. Would he remain the cold billionaire who trusted no one, or would he allow himself to trust the maid who had never once failed him? The doctor placed his bag on the small wooden table and began examining Daniel carefully. He checked the boy's chest, his breathing, and his heartbeat. Maria stood close, wringing her hands, her eyes full of worry. Adrian sat quietly on a chair in the corner, watching both of them. After some time, the doctor looked up. "The boy is weak, but not beyond help," he said. "He needs proper medicine, a better diet, and regular care. With time, he can recover." Maria pressed her hands together in relief. Her eyes shone, and she whispered, "Thank you." Adrian nodded to the doctor. "Prepare everything he needs. Send the medicines to my mansion. I will see that Maria receives them every week." Maria turned to him quickly. "Sir, please, I cannot accept such a favor. It is too much." Adrian's voice was calm but firm. "This is not a favor. It is what should be done. Your brother deserves a chance to grow strong. Let me help." Maria lowered her head. She did not argue further, but her silence carried deep gratitude. That night, after Adrian returned to his mansion, he sat alone in his grand study. The room was filled with golden frames and bookshelves that touched the ceiling, but for once, the treasures around him felt empty. He thought about the small house he had visited, about Daniel's thin smile, and about Maria's tired eyes. He realized something strange. All the wealth he had gathered had never given him the satisfaction he felt today, simply by arranging help for one weak boy. The next morning, Maria arrived at the mansion as usual. She worked quietly, dusting and cleaning, but Adrian noticed a new lightness in her steps. She seemed calmer, as if some hidden weight had been lifted from her shoulders. Later in the day, Adrian called her into the study. "Maria," he said, "the medicines will arrive today. Make sure your brother follows the doctor's advice. If you need anything, tell me." Maria looked at him with steady eyes. "Sir, I do not know why you are doing this for us, but I promise you, I will never forget it." Adrian gave a small smile. Sometimes we do not need a reason to do the right thing. For the first time since she had joined his mansion, Maria allowed herself to smile faintly in return. Days turned into weeks. Daniel's health began to improve slowly. His cough lessened, and his cheeks gained a little color. He even started reading aloud from his books again. Each evening, when Maria returned from work, he would show her what he had learned. Adrian often received reports from the doctor, and each time he felt a quiet sense of pride. He had helped build many companies, but helping this one child felt different. It felt personal. One evening, as Maria was finishing her cleaning in the study, Adrian spoke again. "Maria, do you know why I tested you with the open safe and the golden box?" Maria paused, then nodded slowly. "Yes, sir. I think you wanted to see if I was honest." Adrian raised his brows. "And what made you resist? Many people would not have." Maria looked down at her hands. "Because what is not mine should never be touched. I have seen what greed does to people. It destroys families. I promised myself long ago that I would live with honesty, no matter how hard life became." Her words were simple, but they struck Adrian with force. He thought of the many partners and friends he had lost because of greed. Yet here stood a woman who had nothing and still refused to take what was not hers. That night, Adrian could not sleep easily. He walked through the silent halls of his mansion, thinking about his past. He remembered how people had betrayed him for money, how trust had broken again and again. That was why he had built walls around his heart. But Maria had walked straight through those walls without even trying. A few days later, Adrian decided to visit Daniel again. When he entered the small house, Daniel was sitting at the table, reading loudly from a book. His voice was stronger now, and his eyes sparkled with excitement. "Sir," Daniel said politely, "thank you for sending the medicines. I feel better." Adrian placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "You are welcome. But the real thanks goes to your sister. She has taken care of you when no one else did. Daniel looked at Maria and smiled. I know. She is the best sister in the world. Maria's eyes grew moist, and she quickly turned away to hide her tears. Adrian saw it, and for the first time in years, he felt warmth inside his own heart. As they shared a simple meal together in that small house, Adrian realized something. His mansion was large, filled with riches, yet it had always felt empty. Here, in this modest home, there was no wealth, but there was love, honesty, and trust. And that made the place richer than any mansion. When Adrian left that evening, he thought quietly to himself, perhaps the true test was not of Maria, but of me. As weeks turned into months, Daniel's health continued to improve. His cheeks grew brighter, and his voice carried strength that had not been there before. Maria often returned from the mansion with new medicines or books that Adrian quietly arranged for the boy. Every evening, Daniel would sit at the small table, reading aloud, while Maria mended clothes or prepared food. Their life was still simple, but it no longer felt as heavy as before. Adrian visited them often now. At first, Maria had been nervous each time he appeared at her small home, but over time she grew more comfortable. She realized that Adrian came not as a master but as a friend. He would sit with Daniel, ask him about his studies, and even listen as the boy spoke about his dream of becoming a teacher. One evening, after sharing a meal with them, Adrian walked back to his car with a strange feeling in his chest. For years, his life had been filled with banquets, parties, and meetings, but never had he felt the warmth he felt in Maria's modest home. The laughter of a child, the quiet smile of a sister, and the simple peace of that house seemed more valuable than all the treasures in his mansion. Inside his own study that night, Adrian thought deeply. I tested Maria because I wanted to see if she could resist temptation. But in truth, it is I who was tested. She has shown me honesty, kindness, and strength. Things I had forgotten still existed. The next morning, Adrian called Maria into his office. She stood patiently, her hands folded as always. Maria, Adrian began, I want to ask you something important. Do you ever dream of a different life for yourself? Maria looked surprised by the question. Sir, my only dream is for my brother to grow strong and follow his path. For myself, I do not wish for more. My duty is to support him. Adrian studied her face. She spoke with no regret, no hidden desire. Her life was tied to her brother's happiness, and she found peace in that. That day, Adrian met with his lawyer. He discussed arrangements for Daniel's education, ensuring that when the boy grew older, he would have access to the best schools. The lawyer was surprised by the billionaire's sudden personal concern, but Adrian only said, consider it an investment, not in money, but in character. Meanwhile, Maria noticed small changes in Adrian too. He had grown more gentle with the staff. He spoke less sharply, and sometimes, when he walked through the mansion, his gaze seemed softer, as if he had begun to see life differently. One afternoon, Maria found herself in the garden, trimming flowers as part of her duty. Adrian came walking down the path. He stopped near her and said, Maria, do you know why I trust you now more than anyone else? Maria looked at him quietly. Because I did not touch what was not mine. Adrian shook his head slowly. Not only that. Because even when no one was watching, you chose honesty. That kind of truth cannot be bought. Maria lowered her eyes, feeling both humbled and uncertain. She never thought her simple choices would mean so much to a man of his power. Later that week, Adrian invited both Maria and Daniel to his mansion. It was the first time Daniel had entered the grand estate. His eyes widened at the tall ceilings, the shining floors, and the endless halls. He held Maria's hand tightly, but Adrian bent down and said warmly, this house is not a place to fear. Think of it as a place where your dreams can grow. Adrian led them into his study, the same room where he had once left the safe open as a trap. He opened the safe again, but this time he pulled out not money, not jewels, but a stack of books he had ordered for Daniel. "These are for you," Adrian said. Daniel's face lit up as he touched the books carefully, as though they were treasures greater than gold. Maria watched silently, her heart heavy with gratitude. That evening, as Adrian stood at the large window with Maria beside him, he said softly, "Do you know, Maria, when I left that safe open months ago, I thought I was clever. I thought I would discover the truth about you. But what I discovered was something about myself. I realized that trust still exists. And you gave me back something I had lost long ago." Maria listened quietly. She did not know how to answer, so she bowed her head and said, "Sir, I only did what was right." Adrian turned to her, his eyes steady. "And sometimes, doing what is right is the rarest thing in this world." For a long moment, silence filled the room. Then Daniel's laughter echoed from the corner as he flipped through the new books. The sound broke the silence, and Adrian smiled. That night, after Maria and Daniel left, Adrian stood alone in the study. The safe door was shut, but his heart was open in a way it had never been before. He realized he was no longer only testing Maria. Life was testing him, asking him to choose between his old lonely world and this new bond he had found. And deep inside, he knew the answer was becoming clearer each day. The next morning, Adrian woke with a decision in mind. For months, he had tested Maria, watched Daniel, and tried to understand their lives. But now, he realized that testing was no longer needed. What he had seen, their honesty, care, and quiet strength, was enough. It was time to act, not observe. He called Maria to the study. When she entered, she noticed the unusual calm in his expression. Adrian gestured for her to sit. "Maria," he began, "you have proven something far more important than honesty. You have shown me courage, responsibility, and love. These are qualities money cannot buy." Maria lowered her eyes, unsure of what to say. She had grown used to being respected, but never in such a personal way. "Sir, I only did what I thought was right," she said softly. Adrian nodded. "And that is why I want to offer you a new opportunity." Maria blinked, confused. "Opportunity, sir?" "Yes," Adrian said. "I want to give you and your brother a better life. You have worked for me honestly and without complaint. It is time I help you both, not just with medicines or books, but with a proper future. You will not have to struggle alone anymore." Maria's heart raced. She had never expected such words. For a moment, she felt fear that this might be another test. But Adrian's steady gaze reassured her that it was not. He continued, "Daniel will receive the best education possible. He will have tutors, books, and everything he needs to grow strong. As for you, Maria, I will ensure you have a comfortable life, with freedom to make your own choices. You will never have to worry about survival again." Maria's lips trembled. She could not find the words. She looked at Adrian, then at Daniel, who was peeking around the doorway, curious about the conversation. Adrian smiled gently. "You have earned this not because of money, but because of your character. Your life is a lesson for me and for others. And I want to make sure it changes from today." The following week was busy. Adrian arranged for tutors to come to their home, and Daniel began a structured study routine. Medicines and nutritious food were provided, and Maria finally found time to rest without feeling guilty. She still worked in the mansion, but now it was by choice, not necessity. Adrian visited often. Sometimes he would sit in the small home, helping Daniel with his lessons. Other times he would speak privately with Maria, learning more about her dreams. She had always wished for a simple life, but now she could dream bigger, without fear. One afternoon, as Adrian walked through the garden with Maria, he said, "You know, Maria, I left that safe open months ago to see if you would take what was not yours. I expected curiosity, maybe greed. But you surprised me. You taught me something I had forgotten: trust can exist in the purest form. Maria looked down, smiling faintly. Sir, I never wanted to test you. I only wanted to do my best for my brother. Adrian nodded. And yet, you tested me, too. You showed me that wealth alone does not make life meaningful. It is honesty, courage, and love that truly matter. Daniel ran up to them, holding a book in his hand. Sir, look. I learned a new story today. Maria taught me how to write it down too. Adrian bent down to look at the pages. Very good, Daniel. Keep practicing, and you will be able to teach others one day. Maria watched Adrian with a quiet smile. For the first time, she felt that the world might not always be harsh. There were people who could be trusted, and there were moments where life rewarded honesty and care. Days turned into weeks, and the small house near the market became brighter with hope. Daniel grew stronger, learning faster than anyone expected. Maria felt less burdened, knowing that someone as powerful as Adrian cared for her family. Adrian, in turn, felt a warmth in his life that no amount of money or power had ever given him. One evening, Adrian stood on the balcony of his mansion, looking at the city lights below. He thought about his tests, the open safe, and the golden box. They had all started as experiments in trust, but they had ended in lessons of life. He smiled quietly. Maria had not only passed his tests, she had changed him. His heart, once closed and guarded, was now open in ways he had never imagined. And in that moment, Adrian knew one simple truth: the greatest treasures in life were not gold or jewels, but honesty, love, and the courage to do what is right. As the night settled over the city, he felt at peace. Maria and Daniel were safe, their lives brighter than before, and he had learned something he would never forget. Trust, once given, could transform lives, and sometimes, even a billionaire could be the one to learn the hardest lesson of all. The mansion and the small house coexisted now in harmony, connected not by wealth but by a bond that no test, no money, and no temptation could break. And in that quiet harmony, all three of them found a life richer than any treasure.